Welcome back to the Cryosphere Podcast. Today I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Rebecca Ziegler.
Hello, hello.
And we are joined by Mark Woodward of Wake Bio, whom we're going to be speaking to today about all kinds of stuff. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Mark went to Stanford and studied AI/ML, and then he went on to Harvard. I guess you got your PhD there at Harvard. And then after that, you worked in the field. You worked for Google Brain and a couple of other AI/ML places where you were kind of focusing in on that. And now you started your own thing, right? Wake Bio.
That's right.
And it's kind of in a specific, an unusual, I would say, unusual niche for what you were doing previously, or it seems to be unusual to us. So you started in this kind of abstract research space, the theoretical stuff, and then you kind of narrowed it down to this. So what was your motivation there? Why did you become interested in cryoprotectants and cryonics more generally?
Yeah, so there was a motivation in general to do something that, well, first, I love working on AI. It's just very intellectually stimulating for me, pleasurable to think through the problems, trying to create an artificial intelligence. So that's very enjoyable in the moment. But so about 4 years ago, I tried to, I made the realization that I wanted to work on something that I cared about existing in the world as well. And so that was kind of part of the motivation, is a search for something that I wanted to exist in the world. I had been following for a while the rejuvenation literature, and so clearing of plaques and senescent cells and regrowing thymus, things like that you guys are really familiar with. And so I was excited, and I am excited for the future in which we maintain our same age, or we're able to clear out the damages of aging. But my mind, naturally goes to, we need a safety net. We need something that's going to help people survive until their treatment is ready. So cryonics was that. So for a while, I was kind of maintaining both of these. I had reached out to, we can talk about the different communities, but cryobiology communities, so well-known professors there, and started conversations about helping out. This is while I was still at Google. But then I just kind of made the realization in 2020 that I wanted to make the leap and really focus on cryonics. And so I took a fractional CTO ship with a company, January AI, which has done really well, but spent most of my time, or about half of my time, on the cryonics.
So AI is quite the buzzword, I would say, of the last 3 years. It does, while there have been some amazing AI capabilities developed, it also feels like every second company at this point has slapped AI somewhere onto their product listing just to kind of capitalize on the hype. So one of the latest examples that I came across was a blender that claimed to be AI powered when it was really just running some pre-programmed settings based on sensor input. So for anyone that's skeptical when you talk about using AI and kind of using that with cryonics, can you explain how is Wake Bio planning to use artificial intelligence, and why is AI uniquely capable at fulfilling that function?
Yeah, so we can do some background first on the problem with cryonics, although I'm sure your previous guests have covered this really well. But if you don't mind, does that make sense to cover some of the background, and that will motivate
absolutely.
Why machine learning comes in? So low temperature slows down chemical reactions. So it slows down the chemical reactions that are the biology, the processes of life. One example of this is surgeries. So now there are open heart surgeries that are performed at low temperature. I don't know if they'd be called open heart. They are just surgeries that are performed at low temperatures, so around 20 degrees Celsius. And this will gain, so normally it's, several minutes that you can go without oxygen if your circulation is cut off, but they can perform surgeries up to an hour at those low temperatures, because just the metabolic processes have slowed down so much. So, and what's wonderful is that the lower temperature, or you gain exponential time with a decrease in temperature. So, and it actually goes to infinity as you approach 0 degrees Kelvin, so absolute zero. But yeah, so you're gaining just tremendous amounts of time. So we want low temperature to be able to, halt time if we're going for halting time. But the problem is, going below 0 degrees Celsius, you get ice formation. And ice has a couple of problems. One is that it can cut through tissue, so like physically, mechanically damage things. But another big problem is that it's when the ice crystal is forming, it's a pure water crystal. So it's pushing out all the other solutes, and their concentration is going up in the remaining tissue. And that can like denature proteins. It can cause osmotic pressure across membranes. So, water may flood in, or the cell may dehydrate too much. So that a lot of things can happen. Proteins will denature because of these concentrations. So the ice is really just messing with things. In cryobiology and things that have worked on, cells and tissues and human embryos that we preserved. So for example, human embryos, like that's another example of things that really work. Recently, you guys probably covered this, but there was, I don't know if this was a year ago or so, but there was a 30-year-old twin embryos that were implanted into a mother, and they're now healthy toddlers. So this low temperature really works. But what we do for that is we add, in order to avoid the ice, is we add chemicals that kind of interact with the ice and either decrease the rate of nucleation formation, or the rate of the growth of the ice crystal, or just kind of in other ways protect against the damage that may be caused of the cryoprotectant. So that's what we call these chemicals, cryoprotectants. These work well in thin tissues. In thicker tissues, you're pulling that heat out. You're kind of applying something that's cold on the outside. We can talk about hopefully volumetric cooling, where you're cooling throughout the tissue. But traditionally, it's you're cooling on the surface. You're applying something cold on the surface, and that heat is just diffusing out of the tissue. The thicker that tissue is, the longer it takes to get out, and the more time you spend in this region where ice can nucleate and grow. The cryoprotectants give you more time getting through that region. But still, even with the existing cryoprotectants, the thicker the tissue, the more time you spend in there. So you end up needing a higher concentration of these cryoprotectants. And at those higher concentrations, the current cryoprotectants are toxic to the tissue. So we need cryoprotectants that aren't as toxic, and that ideally that kind of perform better. So have higher glass transition temperatures, more rapid, we should talk about this too. Yes. So a better cryoprotectant is needed. And you guys can cut this piece out, but so with ice, so one of the things that you're going for, if ice doesn't actually, you don't want ice to form. And so what actually happens? What happens is kind of these molecules, so temperature is the motion of these molecules. And you can understand why chemical reactions depend on that motion of the molecules. As you're decreasing the temperature, you're slowing down those molecules. And instead of with ice formation, the molecules fall into a little lattice. They have time to kind of, form this nice crystal lattice. But our goal is to kind of just cool fast enough such that they don't have time to get into that crystal lattice. The cryoprotectants help with this, the rate that we need to cool at, and they kind of just stop in their place. And this is called vitrification, or amorphous solid, or glass. And that's why we call it a glass transition temperature, where you go through this phase of the viscosity being fairly low, and then a rapid transition to a higher viscosity, where it's almost like a solid, but it doesn't have regular structure like typical solids. So cryoprotectants help with this. Cryoprotectants are needed. Improvements in cryoprotectants are needed. And this is where machine learning comes in. So usually the cryoprotectant that we'll be, perfusing into an organism or a tissue to help it preserve is a composition of a number of other chemicals. Each one of those, you have to decide on kind of the concentration you're using of those. So the space is very large. It kind of, even if you were only exploring 10 in each one, it's an exponential growth. It's like 10 times 10 times 10. So the space becomes very large, and you're really exploring a continuous. So machine learning can help with that exploration by modeling that and then able to simulate hypothetical good cocktails to experiment with. That was a long answer for your...
You said something, Mark, that I've never fully grasped. what exactly do we mean when we say that these chemicals are toxic to the cells? What do we mean by toxicity to a cell?
That's an excellent question, and I am not experienced to know exactly what that is yet and what death looks like in those cells. So we'll figure that out. Yeah.
So, Mark, the last time that we saw a significant improvement in cryoprotectants was in the development of M22, and that was in the early 2000s, right? Like 2000 or 2004, 2003, something like that. Why is it then that the more traditional methods of researching new cryoprotectants haven't yielded something substantially better than M22 in the decades since that time?
Okay, so I have asked a lot of the cryobiologists about this. Before we get this, let me give a background on the different fields that are involved here. So there's cryobiology, there's cryogenics, which is just the study of things at low temperature, generally below minus 150 degrees Celsius. So that's any material. There's cryobiology, which is the study of organisms, tissues, biology at those low temperature. And then there's cryonics, which is preserving humans, that my eventual goal is. Most of this research on cryoprotectants and most of the research has been by cryobiologists who are just interested in preserving, cells and tissues. Okay, so that's some of the background. So the conversations that I've had with essentially all of the experts in cryobiology, the answer has been that there just hasn't been much exploration of cryoprotectants. So Greg Fahey is really who you mentioned, 21st Century Medicine, who developed M22, has really done the bulk of this work. Yes, and he's made advancements recently, which I think he's fairly excited to put out. But most groups that are working on different organisms still need to optimize those cryoprotectants themselves, and they'll spend a year or more on their tissue, their specific cell type that they care about. But the general consensus and the response I've had is that we just haven't looked for better cryoprotectants and spent the time. It's a small field.
It just takes a long time to go and look for these better cryoprotectants, run the experiments necessary, do the optimizations necessary. It just takes a very long time to do this, kind of the old-fashioned way. And I guess this is one of the big improvements or innovations that you see in Wake Bio is, like you said, using AI to be able to kind of fast track at least a handful of these different portions of the process.
That's correct. And there are two groups there are groups that are starting to do more high throughput screening and evaluation of cryoprotectants, and they'll generally look for toxicity and permeability and then glass forming ability, so to avoid the kind of ice. And they have different assays for this, for these things. There's so Rebecca Sandlin, Shannon Tessier at Harvard MGH, Adam Higgins at Oregon State University. They're two groups that are doing this, and they're doing things very much the way that a drug discovery would do, where they have assays of the cells. We will do things fairly similar to that. I think that the big difference that we will be doing is that we'll be focusing on the whole organism, and just trying to scale up to the adult phase of that organism, rather than just looking at individual cells and or cryoprotectants just them by themselves, their glass transition, and trying to do things at a much higher scale than people have done before, and incorporating AI.
Yeah. And is this something that the incorporating of AI part, is this something that has only been possible in the past 5 years, given where AI is now? Or was this something that's someone had the idea to do this 10 years ago, 20 years ago? The computational power was already there. It's just a matter of applying it to this field.
Yeah, so not 20 years ago. So 2012 was really kind of the rebirth of neural networks, and when we started using graphics processors to really amplify the processing, and neural networks started to work. And then it's okay, we can collect the data, but still, even then, the techniques weren't really developed. But certainly 2016 on, the techniques that I'm talking about probably could have been applied. It just gets better, and the processing gets better. The approaches get better since then. So it will be better now, but it could have been started then.
So there's kind of three main components, at least that I'm aware of a good cryoprotectant. So you want low toxicity, low viscosity, maybe what you called permeability, and high prevention of ice crystal formation. So how are you planning to balance your focus on those variables, or are there any important variables that I'm missing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've generally covered them. You want low viscosity, and then ideally you want well, if we had to pick something that was ideal, I guess it would be low heat capacity, such that the water you're replacing it with something that just doesn't have a lot of energy in it. We're really not going to affect that much. Probably all liquids seem to be fairly similar, but yeah, you'd want low heat capacity. You want really high thermal conductivity. Again, we're probably not going to affect that. Most liquids are going to be very similar, although the cryoprotectants tend to be worse at this than water, so that is a little bit of a problem. But yeah, thermal conductivity, low heat capacity, and then you want it to get across membranes, which usually this is a problem because polar molecules tend to interact really well with water, so they get in the way of the ice crystal formation, which is good, but they tend to not move across membranes very well. So getting them across membranes, figuring out ways to do that is important, such that they actually get into the cells. But yeah, being able to form a glass. Right, and you want a rapid transition into that. So you want it low viscosity, and then at some point you want the viscosity to change fairly rapidly. You want the low viscosity such that you can perfuse it through the tissue, maybe with the vasculature of the organism, but then you want it to be able to rapidly and at a high temperature change into the glass.
Yeah. And is there a particular thing that you're focused on, like something that you think current cryoprotectants are really missing, or is it really just a matter of improving everything?
Yeah, so I think that we're at a very early stage, and maybe you'll need to have me back on once we have some successes with we can talk about which organism we're starting with, but so the approach that we're taking is very much an engineering sort of AI approach to things, similar to like DeepMind's approach to the Go game, the game of Go, where the AI scientists are probably pretty terrible at playing Go themselves, but they're just throwing enough data at it and letting the AI to discover the patterns itself. So the approach I'm taking right now is not go in with any assumptions about what properties are going to be good. Start with the set of components, cryoprotectant components that we have, but let the AI propose exploration of that space, and then so I have scientists coming on as well that will do that analysis and see if they can that'll get hints to other areas to explore in the space. So certainly human knowledge will be important in there, but we're starting with very little of that, and hoping that AI can explore it.
I think that's really fascinating. Are you so you're saying that you're trying to start things as much of a blank slate as possible with the AI's kind of understanding of what's going on, and so what are you targeting as like the thing that you want each run to like maximize?
Yeah, so this will be still that so we're starting with Zebrafish. So is the organism. So as I mentioned, we're starting with organisms. We'll work with one until adulthood, and then you move on to the next. So we're starting with Zebrafish. There's a number of reasons that Zebrafish are attractive. Mainly they breed quickly and grow quickly and are fairly robust and are transparent. But yeah, so we'll be looking for, is that organism still alive? Is the Zebrafish still alive after the warming process? So the reversible, cryopreservation of it. And we'll just do that with optical microscopes right now, to computer vision, looking at it, making sure that it's still alive. And then, and then that'll be the signal. So binary in the beginning, but we might add other measurements along the way.
Yeah, I like that you're starting with a whole organism, because I think some of the really big kind of papers in the chronic space, we have the one about the kidney, we have one looking at a kind of a rabbit brain. The only whole organism I've heard of is C. elegans, but those are really quite small. So I like that we're focused on not just the organs themselves, but the real organisms. But do you have an idea of, after these fish, what would be your next goal? If everything goes well there, would you go for small mammal, or are we getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves here?
Yeah. So, I mean, my hope was is to jump to a mouse or some small mammal after this. One of our investors has been advocating for doing some sort of amphibian or something, some intermediate organism between that's nearer to us evolutionarily, but maybe a little bit simpler than the mouse. But yeah, so one of those two will likely be the next, I think. But the difficulty of the zebrafish will really guide that as well.
Yeah, if zebrafish took a while to get to where you wanted to get to, then you might take a smaller step as the next one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned the kidney paper. Yeah, that's so one of our lead scientists is on that paper.
And then if we could just back up for a second, because I think people in the cryonic space are sometimes a little concerned. They feel sometimes a bit sidelined by cryoprotection as a larger field, where a lot of the scientists and the researchers are really focusing on organ transplants or something that's, maybe more immediate, but not really solving the larger problem of being able to pause life. What is your end goal? Are you interested in just making some advancements in cryoprotectants, cashing out, big to the pharmaceuticals, or what's the bigger, longer-term vision that Wake Bio has?
Yeah, so no, we are set firmly on reversible whole body human reversible cryopreservation, so cryonics. In my mind, the surest, less diluting ourselves way to that is, and reversible. I mean, so the surest path to that is these organisms. So working our way up in whole organisms. I have a little bit of fear, although we might go into the space for revenue streams, a little bit of fear of just trying to pick different organs within the human and then hope that they'll come together, that there might be challenges that you're not aware of and that you're kind of putting off those to much later. One of the scientists coming on is an expert in the organ preservation, so we could certainly go into that. I mean, the cryobiologists in general, this is kind of why I mentioned the differences in these fields, because cryonics has had some failures in the past and maybe overpromised. The field of cryobiology, they've distanced themselves from that and not want it. Although I feel like that's changing recently. But their focus is generally not in adult phases, definitely not in human cryopreservation, but then not even in adult phases of organisms, other organisms.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it sound like there's anything, of course, adversarial really there. Fundamentally, I think cryobiology and cryonics really benefit each other. And even the people that focus on the organ preservation, there's always cross benefits when it comes to science and kind of raising all ships.
Yeah.
This may not be Wake Bio's focus in the beginning or even for a while, but do you have any goals for the price of future cryoprotectants? And I ask this because right now there's these two main cryoprotectants, right, that are used in cryonics. We have VM1 and M22, which we've talked a lot about. And M22 is generally regarded as the better one because, at least in a lab setting, it leads to slightly better viability in cells post cryopreservation. But M22 is also a lot more expensive than VM1. So I've heard it argued, mainly from Emil Kenzura at Tomorrow Bio, that because the price difference is so large, it's better to just use VM1 and spend the money you saved on improving things like standby response times. Do you have any general thoughts on that assessment, and is price point something that you think Wake Bio should eventually focus on in the search for better cryoprotectants? Yeah,
we are not focused on price point right now, just on success. And then my intuition is you get something working and then you optimize from there. So we're not focused on price. There are, other thoughts on this, like I'm shocked I had like a little neural stimulation device, and I got a bill. They had accidentally billed me directly and not my insurance, and it was like over $100,000 for this little thing. So I'm sure my insurance didn't pay that full amount, but regular procedures, are 10, 20, 1,000. That is not a price. So I would expect that our price point will be significantly over that. Once we can demonstrate reversible preservation of, pigs and other primates, then the first preservation will be much more than Tomorrow Bio's paying, probably in the on the order of $1 million or more. That will certainly come down, but I think if you could be brought back, like right now we're relying on hope and future technologies, but if you're fairly confident that you can be brought back, then I think you're willing to spend a lot more, and then of course we'll drive down that price and try to bring it to everyone, a device in every hospital.
Yeah. Maybe the key here isn't that, is really just that VM1 and M22. While M22 is an improvement, the difference isn't big enough in improvement. And once we get to something that actually demonstrates fully reversible cryopreservation, then price doesn't matter, because at that point you have so much more interest that the field just expands, and then economies of scale take over and go from there.
I think so. Yeah, I doubt that the cost of the actual cryoprotectant will be a significant factor, or it'll be a small percentage of the actual procedure, and there'll be people's time involved, and that probably will dominate things.
And just to put this in a little bit of a concrete perspective, what I've heard is that for a typical case for VM1, and Becca, you can correct me on this, but VM1 is on the order of the cost of all the cryoprotectants on the order of hundreds of dollars, while for M22, for a similar case, the cost would be on the order of tens of thousands of dollars, right? And so when you have this sure, so even if somebody says, look, there's a marginal benefit to using M22, which my understanding is there is, those dollars can, like Becca said, can better be put into something else other than just a marginal improvement in the cryoprotectant itself, into something. So what you're developing, right, and it's just a huge difference, right? And so that makes a lot of sense. But what you're developing is something that presumably, if it's been demonstrated to work, especially demonstrated to work on humans, that's that will change everything from a perspective of medicine and how this is treated, and eventually I think we'll see economies of scale. Certainly the production of this. The question will then be, and I'm sure you hope to be in this position, right? But like, if you have the patent on this, what then? Like, how do you decide to deal with that? But at least from a production point of view, it should be dirt cheap to produce this stuff, hopefully.
I would think so, yeah.
But what if we only get to like some in-between state, right? So what if like you're able to demonstrate that this works quite well in Zebrafish, you spend a few years, you make it work okay in a mouse, like the mouse comes back, eventually it's kind of unhealthy, it dies after 3 days, but hey, it's coming back. And then people are already like, before you get to the point of perfecting it for humans, they're knocking on your door, hey, this is way better than M22 already. It's not great, it's not perfect, we know that, we know you're still working on it, you're perfecting it, but we want it already, right? We want it now. We don't want to wait 5 more years for you to get it even better. We want to change from M22 to your stuff, even though it's not where you want it to be yet. Do you see that as kind of an in-between step, and where you can start selling it, and hopefully in a more price competitive way than M22?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll give a little analogy here, and that there may be a moral obligation to be releasing it. So, we're pushing towards and don't intend to go to humans until there's we have a high confidence that we can reversibly preserve that without the need of future nanotechnologies or something. But like, so yeah, self-driving cars, I think, that was the debate. Like for a while now, I believe they've been superior on accident, injuries to a human driver. So it's kind of, well, shouldn't we replace all human drivers, or at least be introducing them, even though the types of accidents they have are very different than the types of accidents that a human has, but still the injury rate is much lower. So maybe there's a moral obligation to release those things earlier. I haven't really thought about this. I mean, I'm certainly in communication with at least one member of the Alcor board, and there's collaboration opportunities that I would be certainly open to that, and I understand the need, and people are being preserved right now, and we want to use the best technology that's available. And what you raise is an interesting point. I'm not actually sure on the M22 whether the cost is manufacturing or just, that it's kind of a secret sauce that they happen to be charging that price point for. So that would probably factor into, is there gold
Might be
in
both,
there?
yeah.
Yeah.
But
my understanding, I think it is something about the material of M22 that is particularly expensive. But I won't say I'm an expert and know exactly.
So if we wanted to cost optimize things, I mean, certainly the approach that we're taking, we will have a model that will be able to scan the space and predict viability or success of cryopreservation with that cryoprotectant. So then you could use that to scan for things that are inexpensive and
yeah. And I'll make another quick pitch for why I think it's really important to kind of put things out incrementally as well, because at the end of the day, the goal is not to bring back zebrafish, right? The goal is humans, and humans don't always get cryopreserved in perfect lab conditions, right? So I think that you'll benefit a lot from also seeing your cryoprotectants in action, even if they're not perfect yet, but seeing the results of someone being cryopreserved out in like a real world setting where sometimes there's some amount of delay, it's not perfect, and seeing what's the difference between my lab setting and how it worked in real life, and that'll help you kind of gauge to where exactly you need to get in the end.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yes. And and seeing those scans, adipose tissue, most of the animals we'll be testing on won't have a lot of fat, and most of us have more than it's on there, and that's quite a complication. So yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe you can try to fatten up the zebrafish or the mice,
right.
Just feed them cupcakes or something.
Right.
But I like Becca's saying, I think as soon as price performance it makes sense, it would be good to start getting it into the hands of real cryonics organizations. And as a cryonicist, I mean, Becca and I both are, and I'm sure you are, Mark, I would want whatever is the current best cryoprotectant, even if it's not where we want it to be yet. In case I get hit by a bus, I would want that to be whatever the best is on the market, obviously given prices, as Becca was talking about in that ratio. I want to ask you a kind of this might be a sort of a weird left field question, but so you're talking about preserving whole organisms, right? Whether it's whole zebrafish, mice, or obviously humans someday. What are your thoughts on the question of biological reanimation versus uploading, right? Because there's a whole other place of people, a group of people who are focused on that uploading, simulation, blah, blah, blah approach. And they're using very different stuff that we wouldn't, to what these cryoprotectants are, right? They're using aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation or whatever, which is quite different. So what are your thoughts on uploading, biological reanimation, and then of course on these other approaches?
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw that when I looked back at your previous guest that you had Ken Smart on, who's at the Brain Preservation Foundation. Yeah, and they're very they're focused on fixatives, so kind of freezing all the molecules in their place, but not with low temperature, but actually with bonds, chemical bonds that are forming, the aldehydes that you mentioned. And for them, I think they're keeping their option open in the two directions of whether there would be something that could break those bonds and reverse it later, or that it's available then for the slicing and then the scanning, building up the whole connectome and then uploading that. I guess we all work towards the future that we want. For myself, I want a body. I would prefer to keep my own body and have this one. Same for my family and children. So I'm kind of pushing towards the, it's our own biology. I think maybe an argument could be made. This is something I think about often, that I don't know that it's, and the Brain Preservation Foundation, they make this that, it's that the current best the technology that preserves the most information that we currently have, they believe this is this aldehyde stabilized, preservation or fixation of all the molecules in place. And that might be the case. And then you kind of have this interesting question of, well, the technology to reverse that is much further in the future, but more information is being preserved. So it might be this first in, last out kind of scenario where, those people are the, earliest born people to be preserved, but that might be the latest to come out. So I don't know. It would be a hard decision if you were to be preserved right now, which technology to go with. So I'm just pushing as hard as I can to get the reversible demonstration of a whole body biology. But yeah, uploading. I mean, I'll take it. I'll take the uploading over nothing. But I would love the future of biology.
Yeah, I think you're in good company. Max and I are both more on the biological reanimation side. I know in a lot of ways it's largely a philosophical question about, is it really you or how much you feel attached to that. But I think Max and I would join you in preferring to be awoken in this body.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a fly simulation where they mapped it, and what did they do? They probed this is very secondhand, so somebody should look this up, but they probed the region of the simulated connectome that involves sugar, and they watched the region that is motor control of like the tongue shooting out fire. So it was like from the connectome of the fly, they were seeing that connection. It's kind of cool. So I don't think it's impossible. I don't think there's necessarily anything special or missing in the biology that couldn't be replicated. I just personally like the idea of biological.
Yeah, it seems like if you aim for biological and then get eventually very good preservation of the connectome as well in the biological scenario, then presumably you could end up with either one in the future. Whereas I'm still doubtful that the reverse is as easy until you get to very almost magical seeming technology in the distant future. So what is the most, for you, what is the most kind of optimistic scenario for Wake Bio in the coming, say, 5, 10, 20 years?
Most optimistic, yeah.
Like where would you want it to get to within those timeframes?
Oh, yeah. I would be disappointed if we aren't preserving certainly mice in 5 years, adult mice in 5 years, and on our way to a pig or some larger mammal. At that time, I'd be disappointed as well if 10 years we're not able to do a human. But I mean, part of my choice of what to focus on next was to pick something that I could spend the rest of my life on, fail at, and die, happy that I had spent my time on that. So I am committed and will push as hard as I can for, all the years that I have left until it's successful. But I'm really, those are my expectations, the 5 and 10, certainly 10 for a human, but who knows? We could hit on something that works really well for the zebrafish and happens to generalize really well, which there's some hope that would be to mice, and then we scale up really quickly. And we are under that 10-year period for the first human, but yeah, it also could be longer.
So let me ask you a bit of a follow-up there. Let's say that it's 12 years from now, and even zebrafish, you haven't been able to do this perfectly, let alone getting to mice, which is just not working. In that scenario, in that world where that is the case, what do you think? What was the most likely thing to have sort of undermined this project? In other words, what do you think is most likely to be the hard thing that might not work out to get you where you want to go?
Yeah, it wouldn't be, so funding shouldn't be an issue. The approaches that we're taking won't need the levels of, that we're like seeing at Cradle or something. So it shouldn't be funding an issue. Yeah, I mean, what will that look like? This optimization algorithm will hit some size, and where the optimization algorithm is and some failure rate or success rate for that size, where the optimization algorithm is just not able to, it's making predictions on a little bit, but we test that and it's not better. So there's just this real plateau of that. And we'll start to gain confidence on the class of components that we're exploring at that time, that really there's just nothing in there. And then we'll so we have plans to expand beyond that to obviously, cryoprotectants that are not currently involved. Aubrey de Grey has advocated to me to not only focus on things that might have cryoprotective properties themselves, but other chemicals that might inhibit not have properties that are interesting themselves other than just protecting against the existing cryoprotectants that are in there, or that are in the solution too. So, making them less toxic. And that's the only thing that they're serving purpose of. So there is a large chemical space to explore. We will largely go in that order. We won't probably start synthesizing ourselves first. We might then jump to proteins, start exploring protein space, and then jump back to synthesizing chemicals ourselves. So there's quite a large space to run on. But yeah, so it would look like that. We're just further expanding the space of everything in there is like nothing that works. Now, there's always possibility that there's some other technologies that aren't just the cryoprotectants that will make a dramatic shift and make things better. Certainly a big step there was John Bishop's lab work on the magnetic nanoparticles and the ability to volumetrically rapidly warm tissue. And for reasons you want to warm, you actually need to warm faster than you cool, which doesn't make sense, but you guys have probably explored that before. I can go on over that real quickly. Do you want to?
Yeah,
sure,
I'd be curious to hear that, because there's kind of two really big places to optimize here. There's the cryoprotectants, which we've talked a lot about, and then there's just how the cryoprotectants are introduced and dealt with. How it works today in cryonics is that to reduce toxicity, you cool down the patient first and start with low concentrations. And then once the patient is cooler, you start introducing the higher concentrations that are more toxic. So at that lower temperature, the cells are no longer really metabolizing it, and that, for that reason, it's causing less damage. There's a lot of medications that can be introduced to make sure it's perfusing better. There's a lot of things around the actual substance of the cryoprotectant itself that can be optimized. And where do you think that you can optimize that or focus on
totally,
that?
and all of that is within our purview of sort of the cooling rate, if there's annealing periods, the loading schedule. So so Greg Fahey again is a leader in this, or leading this exploration. But the idea of introducing some sort of stress to the organism such that it produces some protective proteins. So there might be those. So all of those things we can be optimizing. But yeah, you're right on the. Then there's the technologies around that. How do you cool from? I mentioned it before. Do you cool from the outside? Which takes longer. I mean, there's longer distances between the temperature differences. Or are you trying to do some vascular cooling, which I think is likely what we want to do as in the larger, or once we go to mammals at all, we'll want to do some sort of vascular cooling. But yeah, at what point do you load the CPA? The warming, that one's largely, I hate to say solved, but like we kind of know something that should work at the scale of humans, which is this magnetic nanoparticle warming. That was John Bishop's group out of the University of Minnesota, and that just stays in the vasculature, and then you apply an alternating magnetic field, and you kind of uniformly warm it up. There ends up being, if you have lower concentrations of these molecule or the nanoparticles in certain areas, then you can get those areas warming faster. But they recently released a paper that even they can kind of control for that. So the ones that become less viscous, so liquid first, they end up not absorbing as much of the energy, and so it kind of self-stabilizes, and you're able to uniformly warm. So that's great. Cooling is still now an issue. But yeah, so the cooling and warming, the difference, the reason you need to warm faster than than you are cooling is kind of obvious, I guess, once you think it through, but it seems counterintuitive. Anytime you're below 0 degrees Celsius, there is a chance for ice to form, but it's not necessarily going to happen. That you still have to have a nucleation event, which means enough molecules need to come together, tight enough packed, and that it is thermodynamically advantageous to continue growing that crystal, and rather than have that little nucleus fall apart. And there's that radius can be calculated about how many molecules need to form. So you need to have this nucleus form, and then also the rate other molecules need to come on and grow in that ice. So as you're cooling below 0 degrees Celsius, you first are in a region of very low viscosity. So if a nucleus formed, it would grow very rapidly because it's low viscous, all the molecules can easily come, but there's not that many nucleus forming because it's just a little bit below. It's not that thermodynamically advantageous to have a nucleus form. So then as you keep cooling, you get down into low temperatures where nucleation can happen much more rapidly, but now it's so viscous because you're at a lower temperature that even if a nucleation event happened, you're not going to be growing very, very rapidly. So the cooling actually can be, happen at a reasonable rate. Now, as you're warming, you have the opposite effect. You're going through a region where nucleation events happen a lot at that super low temperature. And then you get to the less viscous region. You're still below 0 degrees Celsius, so still ice can be forming. And now you have all these seeds of the nucleus and you're in this low viscosity region and they can just grow really rapidly. So you have to, in order to get through that region without those ice, becoming a substantial portion of something that affects the tissue, you have to warm much more rapidly, usually an order of magnitude faster than the cooling.
Yeah. And all these different factors, obviously we're talking about cryoprotectants, and we've talked about the circumstances under which those cryoprotectants are introduced. What role do you see AI playing in helping with that? Do you think AI is going to be really focused on one thing, like optimizing for chemical makeup, maybe some kind of AlphaFold like focus on figuring out one thing? Or do you think that you can build like larger AI models that are taking into consideration a lot of other factors and playing with a lot more variables there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We will use AI in at least three ways. One is just, as everybody's using, large language models to just, generate ideas and be, exploring things. I'm embarrassed to say that a lot of my science, I spent 3 years just reading textbooks on chemistry and physics and thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. But even in development, like I was building a little cryo cooler, so kind of a micro one, and the what size nichrome wire, the heater wire, I was wrapping around it, and ChatGPT just does all of this analysis really well, and it's like, 22 gauge would be perfect for this because of these calculations. So just aiding in the science, I think that's one aspect of it. The other is, so the tooling and the setup, the automation that we'll have, both just, detecting whether the organism is still alive or not, moving things around, there will likely be AI involved in there. Those will be, so the first is just using these really large models that are, as you said, taking in a lot of information. The second will be, more specific to that task. And then the third also, and our primary model that we're developing will be this, taking in the properties, a description of the experiment that's being run, so the structure of the chemicals, the percentages of each of the chemicals, the cooling profile, the loading profile of these things. So taking in all of that information, and the initial model is just a basic prediction then of whether it's going to succeed or not. So, very focused on this single task and not taking in other information. We will then move on to other, as we collect more data, we'll be able to move in a different direction, which may be more generative. That, like the way we would use a model like that is to kind of, actually I shouldn't probably, is to kind of scan it around the space and look for good candidates. But you can use AI in more of a generative way where you say, give me a good candidate for this, and it's literally generating that output. That usually requires much more data, so we need to flip that around. We can trade that compute for that data. We have compute right now, but not a lot of data, and so we can use the other model to kind of scan it around. Moving in the direction of incorporating as much as we can, as you said, but it will start very specific.
Out of curiosity, where you're starting from, where are you seeding this project with a lot of data from some other sources that you're then kind of helping to kick off what you're doing with Zebrafish, or are you just not? Starting as fresh as possible, or are you getting access?
Fresh, it'll be our own. I would love to do that. There are some sources They're usually of like intermediate predictions of properties and not of, will this zebrafish live or not? That said, Shannon Tessier did just have a paper that she released with that was going down to minus 10 degrees Celsius, and they scanned a bunch of cryoprotectants, and it was on zebrafish larvae, which we'll be starting with as well. So that's a good starting point. We will not, so that won't be incorporated, that won't be used as training data, but it'll be used as seeding the experiments. So these are the first experiments that we should run, and then the results of that experiment will become, the first data that we have. And also experiments will just be what are reasonable, samplings from this space. Oh yeah, so where we're at now, we didn't really cover that. So this is a brand new company we've just incorporated. So the focus has been setting up the experimental framework that we have. Well, first breeding up the zebrafish. So now we have, over 10,000 zebrafish. And we have them from, every phase of development. So kind of a week old all the way to adulthood, so that we can, just move as quickly as we need and have as much, organisms as we need to experiment on. And now the shift has been towards the actual experimental setup itself. So the liquid handling and the heat, the cooling and heating setup to perform the experiment.
Sorry, when would you estimate you could actually start your first experiment?
Yeah, so I was debating that today. Very soon we could start. It would be, there's kind of a trade-off of, do you spend a little bit more time such that you can have a higher volume, get up to thousands of experiments a day, or do you just start with I can do 5, and even though it's not going to help with the data at all. So I was thinking about that this morning actually. But yeah, no, within a month we'll be doing the large scale experiments that we want. So hundreds, thousands a day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where do you see the biggest bottleneck in the beginning? Is it just, literal manpower of doing the experiments, or is it the lack of data that we have in the AI?
No, it won't be that. I've spent a bit of time just because it was easy, at least given my background, to do in a lot of simulations of, hypothetical spaces to be exploring, and what sample size, what are enough experiments to make a difference to the model for it to then propose a new set of experiments. And it's like, it's a fairly small number. So even within a single day, the AI would be hopefully making, 10 to 100, we'd be going through 10 to 100 of these iterations where it's, performing like hundreds of experiments and then incorporating that data back in. So it shouldn't be the AI. Right now, because it is like shipping of the components of the equipment we want. So it's this weird, okay, what else can we do? So we're ready when this arrives, this component arrives. And so it's trying to get, and then you want to iterate quickly. So it ends up, doing everything that can be delivered in like a day or so, or 2 days, just to keep that progress moving as quickly as possible.
And where are you, Mark? This is a kind of practical question. Where are you located, and are you working out of a lab in the Bay Area, or? Yeah.
So our round is almost closed. So we don't have. I have so there's a lab at my house. That's where we're at, and that house it's in California, Central Valley. So with this project, we wanted to kind of set ourselves up for financially to make it most probability for success. So my wife and I both grew up in Fresno, California, and my family's been here for a long time. So we moved at this transition, which corresponded to COVID as well, which is also good. We moved back to our hometown, and we've been setting things up here. The plan in the beginning is to have the lab here. The scientists are, as we close the round, they're going to be moving here, and so we'll do that. And then, and then we'll see where we need to go from there, if we need to move the lab to the Bay Area or somewhere else.
Yeah, I respect that a lot, just because, cryonics is a small field, so everyone has to be very resourceful with what they start with. So I think if you're investing in cryonics research, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, because everyone knows it's a small field and you really have to make that funding count.
How big is the team right now in terms of researchers or et cetera?
So we're almost closed with the round. The round we have right now is for 3 of us. So everyone will be a scientist, if I'm considered a scientist yet. But yeah, so myself and then 2 others. So a biologist that has a lot of experience with organisms that have evolved preservation or ice tolerance, and then a sort of mechanical. So cryobiologists often come from mechanical engineering because that's where thermodynamics comes from. So are respected, and they're both PhDs in their postdocs right now. So it'd be 3 of us for this first year to primarily demonstrate the machine learning guidance of this on an organism, but with the stretch goal and my full intention to be able to do the adult zebrafish within that time frame that year.
So I mean, I know I for one, and I'm sure Becca, we definitely want you to succeed, right? We need better cryoprotectants, and hopefully we get cryoprotectants eventually that are so good that you can demonstrate, actual revival in a real human being. That would be amazing. Although, like we were saying, I think the in-between steps are very valuable as well. But for other people who are listening to this and agree and say, hooray, I'm glad somebody is working on this in the way you're working on it. What is it that how can they most help? Like what are the resources that you currently need to push this forward and, hopefully succeed?
Yeah, I think there are 2 areas. The first is that, if you're passionate about this space and our approach resonates with you, then certainly there is some room left in the current round. So it'd be wonderful to have you on. You can reach out for that. And then the other is if you're a scientist, so, chemist, so certainly organic chemist, biochemist, biophysicist. So the seeding of some of the questions you asked that maybe I wasn't able to answer around proposing and seeding. So the AI will be able to explore and will be able to generalize to a certain extent. It can always help if, a human brain is thrown in there of seeding. Well, I just out of intuition or background know that this chemical happens to be similar to that. And it's something that the AI hasn't made that connection yet. Well, then we should seed with that experiment in that other space. So that kind of position has not been filled within the company, and that would be very valuable to collaborate or to have you as an actual scientist in the company to help with that. So that chemical exploration.
Yeah. So anyone that is listening and says, I can fill that role, or I want to invest, or even just someone who's interested in just following the progress, where's the best place that they can reach you and follow along this journey?
Yeah. So both of those are on the website. That you can contact. I think my email's just on there, and then my email's just on there for both of those cases. So you just reach out to me directly.
Perfect.
Cool.
Awesome. So one quick meta question as we're kind of rolling out: is there anything that we should discuss, or anything that you think we should talk about that you're very passionate about that we've missed, or you want to go into more detail about?
That's a great question. I don't think so. We didn't talk about, and I think a lot of people, and I think I attend the Brain Preservation Foundation meetings, and I think they struggle with this a lot. Pushback from just the general public, and so I guess we haven't talked about that, and probably you guys just take it for granted that cryonics is a good thing, or at least people should have that option, as I believe, to survive to their 2A treatment if they want to. In my mind, this is just it's just a continuation of anesthesia or other treatments, or a lung machine that helps you breathe or something. It's something that's keeping you alive until the doctors can cure you and drastically extending that. But it is a huge step function. It's like okay, now we can preserve you for a day or so, but now we can preserve you for years. It has impacts for society, but I think saving lives, preserving people who want to stay alive, I think is a good thing.
I think a lot of people that's one of the benefits of working on organ cryopreservation is that people have instinctually you say, oh, we want to preserve organs, we want to be able to organ bank and all this stuff, and they say, yeah, of course, why, that's a no-brainer, let's do it immediately. And so I think that kind of allows for opens the door for more funding and kind of more public acceptance. And so if progress can be made on organ cryopreservation, you might be able to make a whole lot of progress and then port it over to an entire organism. I like your approach better. It's kind of more direct, but you can see how the PR and the financing angle is benefited by going the organ route.
But
and
I
making
think
progress on the research.
The reality is that everything is weird until it becomes, people don't like it until a significant advancement's been made, and then it's just normal, and then people move on. So I think that the biggest answer to getting people to be more accepting of cryonics is to just make progress in it, and at some point it won't sound so crazy. And you're playing a really big part of that, Mark, so thank you.
So,
we're really looking forward to what you're doing.
Yeah, we hope you succeed quickly and fully
thank you.
as well as possible. For folks who heard this and want to get in touch, we have Mark's website down in the description. We'll have all this stuff, so you can check it there and learn more, get in touch, everything you would like to do.
Great. And that'll just be wake.bio is the our domain.
Yep.
Simple. Nice.
And I'm assuming it's mark@wake.bio, right? And so
That's right.
We'll put it down in the description as well. So with that, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Becca. And until the next one, this has been the Cryosphere Podcast. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.